Within Chuuk Lagoon, the wreck sites fall under Chuuk State Monument protections and related heritage laws. These rules establish regulated, permit-based boundaries for research and diving activities, especially where potential war graves are involved. Removing artifacts, appropriating material, or damaging wreckage without written authorization is a criminal offense. Unpermitted disturbance and commercial salvage activity are treated as illegal. For accredited engineering and archaeological teams, the practical default is survey first, non-intrusive documentation unless a rare written exception is formally granted. Among the heavily regulated sites is the Fujikawa Maru. This vessel was a Japanese transport freighter requisitioned for military service and fitted with defensive armament, and sunk during Operation Hailstone in February 1944. The wreck lies largely upright on the lagoon floor. The seabed around the main hull is roughly 110 feet, with parts of the superstructure rising shallower above it. It stands as an immense artificial reef and a legally protected monument. Deep inside the forward section of the vessel lies Hold Number 2. This specific cargo space is the focal point of specialized aviation archaeological surveys. Descending into the ship, investigators reach the upper limits of the stowed cargo at a depth of 85 feet. The hold contains a complex concentration of disassembled military hardware. Multiple fighter aircraft fuselages were loaded into the transport prior to its final voyage. Among these tightly packed airframes is a singular, highly significant target. The multiple diver and survey accounts describe one Mitsubishi A5M4, known to the Allies as Claude, mixed into this cargo block. It is widely cited as one of the only known surviving A5M airframes, though that broader claim is difficult to prove without physical access. The objective for the investigative team is precise. They must confirm the diagnostic identity of the airframe and establish a high-resolution visual baseline of its physical condition. Those objectives can only be met under a strict non-intrusive permit. Cutting, lifting, or any other recovery-style intervention is off the table. The team cannot touch the fragile aluminum skin, shift overlying debris to expose hidden markers, or scrape away marine growth. All verification must come from standoff photography that records the airframe exactly as it sits, building the proof chain from what can be seen, nothing more. Every movement the survey divers make around the Fujikawa Maru is governed by this legal and physical reality. Planning the dive requires an acknowledgement that the environment itself dictates the terms of the engagement. Inside the cargo hold, investigators work at depth while maintaining strict buoyancy control to avoid any accidental contact with the wreck. The preservation mandate leaves no margin for drifting gear, sloppy trim, or casual finning. A single equipment strike against the aircraft or the surrounding ship structure would violate the core directive of the mission. The team operates strictly as observers, tasked with capturing a detailed optical record of a machine that will never be lifted to the surface. Protected as a monument, as the A5M4 fuselage cannot be handled or recovered. The team accepts the trade-off and designs dives to maximize usable imagery while leaving the hold untouched, focusing on external geometry and baseline condition for future comparison. The initial challenge of simply locating the target is solved. The coordinates are confirmed, and the survey team possesses the legal clearance for a purely visual operation. The constraints of the protected site set the stage for a highly complex underwater inspection. What specific dynamic trapped this fragile aircraft intact deep inside the hold of an armed transport ship during a massive naval strike? During a 2-day window on February 17th and 18th, 1944, a coordinated naval strike triggered an irreversible sequence of events that ultimately sank the Fujikawa Maru. The 436-foot armed transport ship sustained critical damage during the attack. Accounts describe the ship being struck by torpedoes and bombs, though the exact hit sequence and weapon weights vary across reports. The resulting structural breach caused immediate and massive water ingress. This massive water flow dictated the survival of the aircraft within. Rapid flooding and the confined stowage geometry limited how far the cargo could shift. When the lower hull breached, water surged into the ship, and the hold spaces began to fill, damping motion rather than creating a high-impact shatter field. The aircraft fuselages were packed tightly in a specific transport configuration without their outer wings attached. In that tightly constrained environment, the fragile aluminum airframes were more likely spared from violent tumbling and major structural tearing as the ship went down. As the ship went down, rapid flooding and tight confinement fixed the stowage stack against the surrounding bulkheads, leaving the fuselages clustered on top of heavier cargo instead of scattering into a wide debris field. The sinking mechanics preserved the transport geometry inside the hold. Today, that same structure is failing. Corrosion and localized collapses in the upper decks have created an unpredictable overhead hazard that cages hold number 2 and blocks direct vertical access. Divers cannot simply drop through the primary hatchways. They must thread entry and exit routes beneath tons of weakened steel, sharply limiting safe penetration time. Every minute spent inside the hold increases the exposure to a potential collapse event. The survey planners must calculate the maximum allowable time under the degrading ceiling and strictly enforce abort thresholds based on structural stability assessments. The heavy steel plating above them could give way without warning, blocking the exit path. The team must navigate a maze of fallen beams and twisted metal just to reach the operational depth of the aircraft. The historical sinking preserved the cargo, but the modern structural reality ensures the airframes remain completely trapped. The historical loss sequence provided the spatial context, while the present condition of the wreck dictates the absolute limit on human access. With physical extraction blocked by both law and structural collapse, how do engineers map a fragile airframe locked in a degrading, dark steel box? After 82 years, marine sediment, rust, and oxidized metal coat every horizontal surface inside the enclosed hold. The immediate challenge is not only the absence of ambient light, but how quickly visibility can collapse when the static water column is disturbed. The team must map under the constant threat of a self-induced sensor blackout. Operational directives establish that the survey objectives prioritize non-destructive baseline mapping and positive identification. There is zero provision for physical extraction or artifact recovery planning. To fulfill this mandate, the team depends exclusively on zero-touch photogrammetry. This mapping technique requires the divers to swim precise, overlapping tracks around the wreckage, while capturing thousands of high-resolution digital photographs. Software later stitches these images together to construct a scaled, three-dimensional baseline model of the cargo. The entire photographic grid must be executed flawlessly without a single camera housing, lighting array, or diver fin making contact with the fragile debris field. The execution of this photographic grid is severely compressed by a rigid mathematical boundary. The primary targets sit at an operational depth of 85 feet. Depending on breathing gas and dive profile, no decompression limits can impose a narrow window of bottom time to complete imaging passes. Every minute spent adjusting strobes or hovering to frame, a shot directly consumes this non-negotiable safety margin, forcing a rapid, continuous workflow. But the faster the team works, the more respiration can destroy the visibility the cameras require. In the enclosed overhead space, exhaled bubbles can pool under deteriorating decking, scour rust and silt loose, and turn the water column into a suspended particulate cloud. The result is severe strobe backscatter that can degrade high-resolution imagery into unusable glare within minutes. To counteract this rapid loss of visibility, survey planners must dictate a highly disciplined underwater workflow. Divers must maintain absolute buoyancy control, hovering motionless above the wreck to prevent fin wash from stirring bottom sediment, while simultaneously managing the overhead debris rain. Teams often deploy specialized closed-circuit breathing systems to eliminate exhaust bubbles entirely, and though the logistical limits of the operation sometimes require mixed equipment, the divers must work in a carefully choreographed sequence, moving systematically from the clearest sections of the hold inward. Despite these severe operational limits, the visual baseline methodology proves effective when executed with precision. The team successfully maps the spatial footprint of the cargo before the environment collapses around them. The divers must capture data rapidly from a safe standoff distance, accepting that the surrounding water will soon turn to an impenetrable brown fog. With visual sensors severely degraded by siltation, what specific geometric signatures survive in the gloom to prove this fuselage is not just another zero? To differentiate one specific aircraft from another in an unlit, sediment-heavy environment, investigators must rely on rigid geometric limits. Soft shapes, painted insignia, and fabric control surfaces are erased by time and marine decay. Hard structural boundaries, however, remain readable. Inside hold number 2, the physical cargo layout presents a dense identification problem. Visual records verify the presence of at least 5 distinct fighter aircraft fuselages secured tightly together in a confined space. These airframes share a similar overall scale and were stowed in the identical transport configuration, meaning they were loaded without their outer flight surfaces attached. The dominant aircraft type stored in the hold is the Mitsubishi A5M4. The investigative target is the single A5M4 Claude known to be mixed into this cargo block. To prove its identity, surveyors must isolate its unique physical geometry from the surrounding zeros using only visual evidence. The identification process relies on a specific diagnostic signature built into the core airframe structure. The A5M4 was an earlier generation fighter aircraft, designed for a maximum top speed of 270 miles per hour. The engineering parameters of its era dictated specific aerodynamic and structural choices that differ fundamentally from the later Zero models. The 2 most prominent visual markers available to the team are the cockpit architecture and the landing gear attachment points. The Zero features an enclosed cockpit with a track-mounted sliding canopy, along with complex wheel wells designed for fully retractable landing gear. The A5M4 utilizes an open cockpit design, characterized by a distinct metal framing profile directly behind the pilot seat. Furthermore, it was built with fixed landing gear. The wing root sections of the fuselage feature heavy, rigid attachment points where the non-retractable landing gear legs and aerodynamic fairings were permanently bolted to the main spar structure. The survey team methodically scans the clustered fuselages, looking exclusively for these unalterable structural markers. The marine environment actively degrades thin aluminum and heavily corrodes magnesium components, but the heavy mounting brackets and structural voids remain distinct. By analyzing the high-resolution baseline imagery, the team isolates one specific fuselage sitting atop the stowage stack. The primary framing immediately surrounding the pilot position clearly lacks the canopy rails and enclosed framework found on the adjacent Zeros. Moving down the side of the airframe toward the lower structural bulkheads, the distinctive fixed landing gear mounts are clearly present on the exposed wing root. This precise combination of open cockpit framing and fixed gear attachment geometry provides the primary anchor proof required for the investigation. The visual baseline successfully documents the primary orientation of the aircraft and provides an absolute confirmation of its identity among the surrounding machines. That diagnosis is also the ceiling. Under the non-disturbance permit, surveyors cannot shift cargo, rotate the fuselage, clear silt from joints, or enter the cockpit to reach serial plates, and one side of the lower structure remains pressed into the stowage stack. Once the outward-facing geometry is mapped, no further forensic verification is possible without violating the rules. The baseline survey confirms the core identity of the aircraft using only its most robust structural differences. The location and condition of the primary mass are now permanently logged in the historical record without violating the non-disturbance mandate. The central fuselage geometry is positively identified, but where are the remaining flight surfaces required to complete the historical record? The central fuselage is positively identified, yet an immediate evidence contradiction exists within the cargo space. Surveyors observe multiple detached outer wings and flight surfaces scattered across the hold. But visual data alone cannot definitively link these critical components to the primary A5M4 airframe. This separation is a direct result of the specific transport configuration utilized by military logisticians. To maximize the internal volume of the cargo vessel, ground crews systematically broke the fighter aircraft down into modular sub-assemblies before loading. The physical geometry of deep-water maritime transport required isolating the center fuselage from the lifting surfaces. This procedural breakdown minimized the deck footprint of each machine, but it intentionally distributed a single complete aircraft into a disconnected matrix of isolated parts. The visual survey successfully documents this exact 1940s stowage pattern. Navigating the perimeter of the cargo block, investigators map several spare fighter wings stacked vertically against the heavy steel bulkheads. Heavy transport cradles, designed to support the airframes during rough sea transits, lie scattered across the lower deck plates. The primary fuselage rests heavily on top of other crated supplies and adjacent aircraft, far removed from the outboard wing assemblies. Documenting this distributed layout provides an accurate spatial record of the historical supply chain, confirming exactly how the equipment was packaged for its final transit. The exact positions of the spare wings and the transport cradles are strictly locked into the site map. However, this distributed physical layout creates an absolute proof ceiling for the investigation. In a terrestrial conservation facility, engineers would utilize heavy lifting gantries to align the detached wings with the main fuselage. They would analyze the spar bolt patterns, measure the alignment tolerances at the wing roots, and physically verify the structural pairing. Inside the hold, the legal non-disturbance mandate permanently blocks any attempt at physical assembly. The surveyors cannot lift a detached wing from the bulkhead to test its mechanical fit against the main body. They cannot maneuver the heavy aluminum components to check for matching stress fractures or corresponding factory alignment marks. The outer wings must remain leaning against the steel bulkheads exactly where they were lashed down 8 decades ago. The inability to physically interact with the debris creates a secondary, insurmountable proof limit regarding serial identification. On these early generation fighters, factory serial data plates are riveted to internal bulkheads, often located deep inside the wing roots, the landing gear bays, and the cockpit structure. These small metal plates hold the ultimate proof required to match a specific wing component to a specific fuselage serial number. Inside the enclosed hold, every internal surface is heavily coated with a dense layer of marine silt and rigid biological growth. Because the team is forbidden from brushing the plates clear, scraping the biological crust, or applying any targeted cleaning tools to the aluminum skin, reading the stamped manufacturing numbers is physically impossible. With serial evidence inaccessible and detached wings untestable against the fuselage, the historical record remains permanently fragmented. If physical assembly is forbidden and site identity is maxed out, what is the final trajectory for the surviving unpainted aluminum? Protected in situ, the A5M4 is shielded from looting and recovery alike, but it remains continuously submerged in a chemically aggressive saltwater environment. The dominant mechanism of loss is continuous galvanic corrosion. The fuselage consists heavily of unprotected aluminum and magnesium alloys. These thin, non-ferrous materials rest directly against, or in close proximity to, the massive steel bulkheads and heavy cargo cradles of the transport ship. When dissimilar metals are electrically connected and immersed in salt water, the ocean acts as an electrolyte, and galvanic coupling can accelerate loss of the less noble alloy. In that pairing, the aircraft's light alloys can corrode faster at contact points and along conductive paths. This means the saltwater environment actively strips electrons from the fragile aluminum skin and magnesium engine castings. The process physically consumes the aircraft from the microscopic level outward. Solid aviation-grade alloys are steadily converted into porous, waterlogged oxides that possess zero structural strength. The deterioration is continuous and entirely irreversible. The aluminum skin panels slowly thin out until they dissolve entirely into the water column, while the heavier magnesium components swell and eventually crumble into white powder. For exactly 82 years, this galvanic battery has operated without interruption. The present management condition of the site legally binds the hands of marine conservators. The conditional visual surveys are permitted for accredited teams, but physical intervention and artifact recovery remain strictly prohibited by law. Engineers cannot extract the fuselage to place it in a controlled freshwater desalination bath. They cannot attach active cathodic protection systems or sacrificial zinc anodes to the aircraft frame to divert the electrical current, as altering the site configuration would directly violate the non-disturbance mandate. Because direct intervention is completely blocked, the investigative team cannot halt or reverse the active corrosion processes consuming the aluminum structure. The decay rate is driven by a combination of salinity, dissolved oxygen, temperature, water movement, biological growth, and the degree of metal-to-metal contact inside the hold. Because direct intervention is forbidden, the stewardship becomes measurement. The site is placed on a monitoring watch list, and periodic baseline datasets are captured non-intrusively and compared against earlier imagery to quantify the annual rate of material loss across the airframe. This precise visual baseline becomes the primary tool for ongoing site stewardship. It allows the management team to document exactly which structural stringers are actively failing and to mathematically model when the central fuselage will ultimately collapse under its own decaying weight. The core objective shifts entirely from saving the physical hardware to preserving the precise geometric memory of the machine before the ocean consumes it completely. The strict heritage lockdown ensures the site will never be looted or fragmented by human hands, but it also guarantees the aircraft will never leave the enclosed hold of the transport ship. The visual record is secured for history, but the physical aluminum continues an accelerated decay process under the strict protection of law. How long will the diagnostic markers survive the lagoon's galvanic battery before 82 years of structural memory is erased entirely?